on some farm. And that uncertainty is so key, I think, to being a writer, a fiction writer. For some reason, I always turn to fiction. I always think I'm going to write a memoir, I'm going to write some biography autobiography or something like that, but I always turn to fiction, similar to Mr. Decker was talking about. Why I wrote this book, this takes place, so the first presentation was 20s and 30s, and then we had 40s and 50s. I'm going to take you up to 1967, so eventually maybe we'll get to the present. My mother-in-law, she would tell me this story about this devastating fire in Chicago, right straight east of here, at Our Lady of the Angels School, where 92 children died and 3 nuns. She was a student there. She had graduated already, but her brother was a student at the time of the fire. And so she would tell me about it. She didn't have many specific stories because it was difficult for her to talk about. Then I read about it, and so I was doing a lot of research for this book even before I decided to write it. And I guess the reason I turned finally to write the book is because back then in this neighborhood, this mainly Italian neighborhood, nobody talked about the aftermath of the fire. I talk to young audiences sometimes and I ask them this question. My Uncle Jerry, he was in the fire. He was at the school during the time of the fire. He was taken out of the room because they needed help to load this truck for this clothing drive. When he found out that 26 of his classmates had died that day. And I asked these young audiences, how many times do you think Jerry talked about this fire? And they don't know the answer. They don't know that he never talked about it. And that probably doesn't surprise people in here with the culture back then, 1958. So I wanted to give voice to people who didn't have a voice back then. My Uncle Jerry, my mother-in-law Marilyn. And it's fictional, but I tried to make it as accurate as possible, except for the family. So this takes place 1967, 9 years after the fire, and they're still dealing with it. So I just wanted to read the first chapter. It's pretty short. Summer 1967. This over here. You guys doing all right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's the title of the book?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's such a long title that I almost forget it myself. Next time it's going to be a one-word title. It's going to Where My Body Ends and the World Begins. I even stuttered on that, but it's a line from the book, and I'll briefly explain the meaning of that when I'm done here. Where My Body Ends and the World Begins. Summer 1967. Neighbors gather. A familiar voice calls out, "We need an ambulance!" I've heard this before. The sky opens, limitless, vast, white fire seizing my leg. Why do I always forget this part? I'm 20 and lying in the street, and I've injured the same leg 3, 4 times now. The sinister left leg, Nona calls it. She's 71 and lives in the flat below us and wears black and points to my cursed leg every time I limp. She calls up to her Christ for guidance and understanding, pleading, but quickly waves the plea away, knowing her prayers won't be answered. Then she turns and reaches as if for a cane, which must be for me, to mock me, because she refuses help of any kind. She lost her own cane after a few weeks, but not the habit of reaching for it. Now I'll have to face her again. Mr. Lipschultz is his voice I hear. He leans and blocks the sun and studies me, then my leg. I think I detect shock in his glare, and this is what tightens my gut, his grave reaction. Mr. Lipschultz is a son of a bitch in our block who calls the cops if someone's washing the car with the radio blasting. He's an ex-cop himself, retired 3 years ago, so he knows how to talk to him. "An ambulance," he says again. But there's no urgency in his voice. He shifts to the right and the sun blinds me. "Don't move," he says, as if this is a possibility. I dare a peek thinking I'll see blood, because I felt the crunch, heard the dull snap. I swear I feel wetness, but this must be my head playing tricks, because there's no gash, no pool of blood, just my leg twisted at an impossible angle, a thing apart, gory and satisfying. Something's oozing on the inside maybe, the tibia in pieces. You learn the names of bones when you break them. This time I'm pretty sure it's both the fibula, which could fracture from an off-balance sneeze, and the tibia, the shin bone, more substantial. With my fingers, I venture down my thigh and wonder if I shattered my femur, too, this time. Just out of reach is the baseball I've been gripping, a black bruise on the leather. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Lipschultz asks. "What kind of goddamn klutz? If I didn't know better, what, do you fall on purpose? Is this some sick way of getting attention? I know he means for my dad, to get the attention of my dad. Other neighbors are behind him, keeping their distance because Officer Lipschultz is on duty now, out of retirement. What is this hold he has on everyone? Why does that steely gaze seem so protective? He picks up my baseball, turns it in his hand, lays his fingers across the seams. Go to hell, I mutter under my breath. What? He asks. The ball, hand over the ball. I got your ball right here, he says, and tosses it away from me. Yeah? Go to hell, I say clearly. I take in his canvas shoes, the thick wool socks in the middle of summer, the crazy old bastard. He bellows over his shoulder in his usual boom. Is anyone called? I hear a distant siren then, as if on his command. They'll send me back to the shrink now. Either that or they'll think I'm trying to dodge the draft because my number's coming up. That's how everyone puts it, dodging. Like thousands of guys like me are faking left and darting right. Like going to war is fucking dodgeball. If you're quick enough, you get to shatter your bones on a one-way street in Chicago rather than on the fields of Cambodia or wherever the hell they're fighting. The throbbing is a sound now like it's coming from outside. From one of the cars gliding by I hear, one pill makes you larger and one pill makes you small. I close my eyes to steel myself but worry I'm going to pass out, so I force one eye open. Beyond Lipschultz, neighbors line the sidewalk on the other side, trying to catch a glimpse of that lanky, stupid Anthony Lazeri klutz who can't cross a street without incident, the gimp. What happened? They'll all want to know. Did a car swipe him? Is this some kind of hit and run in our neighborhood with Mr. Lipschultz on duty? What will I say when people ask? What will my story be? I can live with hit and run because Lipschultz's cop pals will have questions. Make a car? Description of driver? More important, what do I say to Nona? To my mom, who has suffered enough? Suddenly, tiny Mrs. Mazzolini is in my face, a biscotti in her bony hand. I might be dying, but I still have to eat before I get there. Grazie, I tell her, and take it. The biscotti is warm, and what the hell? I take a bite as she backs away. The glazed sweetness coats my throat and somehow eases the pain. I search through the crowd for my sister Ellie, who's only 11, but seems much older, like she's ready to run the world. She'll shake her head the way she's seen Nona do, then she'll nurse me back to health, ordering me around when I start to feel sorry for myself. I swallow and the biscotti falls from my fingers, then I do pass out, but it must be for just a second or two, because when I open my eyes, nothing has changed, except that I realize, as if for the first time, that my leg is shattered. That would be hell, I think, to pass out every few minutes and to come back having forgotten with the realization of this. My leg seizes up again. I spot a red halter top across the street and I squint hard to see if it's my sometime girlfriend, Mary Ann, who lives next door, which would be impossible because she's at school taking finals for 2 summer classes so she can graduate college in 3 years. What's the hurry? I always ask her. She should be here in the street holding my hand and forgiving me for being such a jerk the past few months. The past few years, really. I glance back at our apartment at Nona's window. I think I spot the curtain flutter. I picture her rooted there seconds before, glaring out, then turning back in disappointment. I didn't break my leg to slow me down, or because I wanted to kill myself, or to gain Mary Ann's sympathy, or anyone else's. I broke my leg, the left one, because the entire length of it, or nearly, inside and out, the bones, the tendons, the muscles, the skin, the sparse forest of hair, none of it belongs to me. So very, very briefly, just to wrap this up here, the fire doesn't even come up yet. There's so many things going on, but he has this rare condition where he feels like a part of his body is not a part of him. It's a real condition. These people actually want to amputate their arm or their leg because, you know, imagine like you had something caught in your tooth, and all day you try to get it out, and all day, and then the next day it's still there. That's all you would be thinking about. And imagine that a part of your body is not a part of you, what the lengths you would go to resolve that. So anyway, what I tried to do is pair that unresolved feeling about his own body with the unresolved grief that the people experience in the fire, and I tried to bring those two together.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Suzanne Ross.
Suzanne Ross is new to IA Literati, and we're pleased to welcome her and her brand of writing. So, Suzanne, come and introduce yourself and tell us about your work.
Thank you so much. It really is an honor to be invited here. My Italian side is obviously on my father's side. DeCarlo is the last name, and we grew up in New Jersey. So the Italian experience I'm familiar with is Newark, New Jersey, and Long Island. So I'm very excited to be welcomed into the Chicago Italian experience. And I mean, there's a lot of books that I need to buy, honey. So I'm again very thankful to Anna and Dominic for including me today. I would like to, and I carefully timed it so it's like 14 minutes and 39 seconds. So I think we'll be okay. Okay. So I would like to talk about two projects actually of mine and talk about how they're connected. One I completed 10 years ago, and it's my nonfiction book called The Wicked Truth: When Good People Do Bad Things. And it's about the Broadway musical Wicked. Has anyone seen that musical?
No.
Listened to the soundtrack? Read the book? Okay, great. Then you know that the musical is the story of the Wizard of Oz, told from the point of view of the Wicked Witch of the West. In my book, I used the musical as a way to give an introduction to Mimetic Theory, which is a revolutionary explanation of human behavior that, when I learned about it, challenged everything I thought I knew about good and evil. Now, the theory was developed by René Girard, one of the most brilliant thinkers of the late 20th century. Girard's thought is counterintuitive, and reading him feels a little bit like having your foundation unmoored by a twister. Two insights of his radically alter the way we think about conflict and peace. First, he convincingly demonstrates that we come into conflict not because of differences, but because of what we have in common. We fight because our desires have converged on an object neither side is willing to share. In other words, our enemies are mirror images of our desires, more like us than we are comfortable admitting. And second, Girard insists that the greatest obstacle to peace is not evil or wicked people, though they certainly exist. The greatest obstacle is the faith that good people have in the goodness of our own violence. He offers brilliant insights into the dynamic of scapegoating by which good people convince themselves that they have identified the wickedest witch of all and are therefore justified in killing her. To achieve peace, Girard insisted good people must learn to recognize just how often our enemies are our scapegoats. Now again, this is counterintuitive thinking. So when I saw the musical Wicked, I kind of resisted going to see it because I had been a fan of the 1939 movie and I didn't want anything to spoil my enjoyment of the wonderful Wizard of Oz and my thrill at the end of the movie when a good little girl, just like me, had defeated the most wickedest evil person in the land. Girard, though, taught me that this story of good conquering evil is an example of what he called a myth of good violence. Now, in The Wicked Truth, I contrast the movie with Wicked the musical, which does what no good myth would ever do: question the necessity of killing the witch. Now, you may be surprised to learn that there are plenty of clues in the movie that cast doubt on the goodness of Dorothy and her friends. Clues that the myth of good violence keeps us from taking seriously. What did I just do? Oh, yeah, okay. I was thinking about putting the book down. All right, don't think about anything else. Okay, for example, remember that when we first meet the Wicked Witch of the West in the movie, her sister has been killed by Dorothy's falling house, right? All that's left of the poor woman are her shoes. Now, they end up on Dorothy's feet, right? Everyone's seen this movie, right? You know the story. And the witch wants them for herself. When Dorothy refuses to give them up on the advice of good counsel, the good witch of Glinda, the wicked witch is enraged. She vows to get the shoes, even if she has to kill Dorothy to get them, right? Now, the movie wants us to accept the Wicked Witch's embrace of violence as evidence of her wickedness. For if she succeeds in killing Dorothy, we would call it a murder, right? Of course. So with that in mind, let's skip ahead to a pivotal scene in which Dorothy and her friends mirror the witch's violence almost exactly. It's when they have their audience with the wizard. Each of them wants something as desperately as the witch wants the shoes, right? I don't have to name the things. Okay, what does the wizard tell them they must do to get what they want? Bring him the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. And they know right away that they're going to have to kill her to get it, right? But that doesn't deter them. Like the witch, they are willing to kill to get what they want. But because the witch is wicked and they are good, the assumptions we bring to the story, neither they nor we question the morality of this particular murder. Now let's skip to the end of the movie. Remember that when they bring the broomstick to the wizard and demand that he fulfill his promise, you know, to make their dreams come true, he tells them, what? They already have what they so desperately wanted. But we somehow managed to ignore this rather blatant evidence that Dorothy and friends have killed someone for no good reason. And so we join the Ozzy in celebration of the witch's death without any moral misgivings. The movie ends with good people never understanding that in the name of goodness, they have done a very bad thing. The wicked truth is that when good people use violence to achieve our ends, we must give up our claim to being good. Now, my other project seems on the surface to be very different from the wicked truth. It's my work in progress, a play inspired by the life and work of the great Italian educator, Dr. Maria Montessori. And I call the play The Miracle of San Lorenzo. I wish I had it to hold up someday. But like Gerard, Montessori's work has direct application to the pursuit of peace. In 1907, she began an experiment with a group of 50 3- to 6-year-olds who were running wild and vandalizing their low-income housing project in San Lorenzo, a slum district of Rome. But under the influence of Montessori's carefully prepared learning environments, these impoverished children from mostly illiterate families became calm, peaceful, and capable of intense meditative concentration. When they began to read and write with very little instruction, it shocked Dr. Montessori as much as it shocked the world. And her little experiment in San Lorenzo became a pilgrimage site for those interested in unleashing the untapped human potential for peace. she realized that by shifting the method of teaching from talking at children to observing and supporting what children were doing spontaneously, a new type of humanity would emerge, one that was less prone to violence and scapegoating. Now, Maria Montessori died in 1952, just as René Girard's career was beginning. But in many ways, her discovery is an application of Girard's mimetic theory to education. They were both geniuses. A French genius, Girard is a French immigrant, and Montessori, an Italian genius, but boldly proposed theories that challenged conventional thinking. And they scandalized the world in large part because they were scientists who made no secret of their faith. They shared a conviction that their discoveries were not of their own making, but were given to them in flashes of insight for a divine purpose. As Dr. Montessori quips at one point in my play, "My method is scientific, my faith is in God." Both were extraordinary scientists who refused to scapegoat religion. And now I'd like to take the few minutes to introduce you to Dr. Montessori as I'm dramatizing her in my play. In these excerpts, she is addressing the attendees of the first international training course in her method that was held in Rome in 1913. Many Americans were there, actually. She directly addresses the audience as if you are these first students. So I invite you to imagine attending the lectures of this world-famous innovator as she shares her discovery of the secret inner life of children with you. I'm not an actress, but I'll pretend I'm Dr. Montessori. It is tempting to be sentimental about children, but sentiment will blind you to the real child. You must cultivate love, not sentiment, for it is love that desires to be drawn into exquisite knowledge of the beloved. May I tell you something? To the world, I am an accomplished woman, replete with fame and honor. Indeed, when I was young, I desired my own glory most of all. But I did not find joy until I found the child. When I am with children, I am nobody. And the greatest privilege I have when I approach them is being able to forget that I even exist. For this has enabled me to see things that one would miss if one were somebody. Little things, simple but precious truths. One day early in our experiment at San Lorenzo, I had entered the classroom holding in my arms a 4-month-old baby girl that I had taken from her mother in the courtyard. She was swaddled, as is the custom, and her face was full and rosy, and she was so still that her silence impressed me greatly. The children gathered around me, naturally interested to see what I was holding so carefully in my arms. "Do you hear?" I asked them. "Listen. She's not making a sound. None of you could do as well." I said it as a little joke, but to my surprise, the children looked at me intensely, so I continued to draw their attention to the silence. "Notice how soft her breath is. None of you could breathe as silently as she." They took my comment to heart. They became motionless. They held their breath. It was an impressive silence. Little by little, we could hear other slight sounds that often went unnoticed. The far-off chirping of a bird, the drip of water hitting the floor. When I thought they had been silent for as long as was possible for them, I sent them back to their work. But they did not move. Not until I promised that they would practice silence again tomorrow did they return to their activities. Who were these children? Capable of such advanced spiritual discipline. I remembered the words of Christ. The kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. And the play ends with this address from Dr. Montessori. Or it ends this way now. Who knows where the edits are going to take it. Okay. Congratulations, dear students. You have completed your first month of training. A good time for a story about St. Lawrence, the great martyr of the early church for whom the San Lorenzo district is named. In the 3rd century, the Emperor Valerian ordered all bishops, priests, and deacons to be put to death. Now, the Bishop of Rome, Sixtus II, was found murdered in the catacombs with 6 of his 7 deacons. The only remaining deacon, St. Lawrence. The next day, he was arrested, though not immediately killed, because the Romans knew that he was the deacon in charge of the treasury and distributing the church's offerings to the poor. So the Romans demanded he bring them all the treasures of the church if he wanted to avoid the fate of his brethren. Now, dear Lawrence did return in 3 days' time, but not with the money from the treasury. No, he arrived leading a procession of the poor and sick of Rome. These are the treasures of the church, he said, and for his faith he was tortured and burned to death on a gridiron. Now, friends, you have been called to a great redeeming work. And though you will not be roasted on a gridiron, you will be misunderstood by the world. Those who store up earthly treasures for themselves will never recognize the value buried within the hearts of little children. Children wait in hope that we will swallow our pride to be led by them into the future God is preparing for us all. Love does not coerce or demand. It waits in patient silence to be received. Now go, learn from the children, and spread the word among all the earth that God has not withdrawn from the world or hidden his face from us. The age of peace has begun, and you are its missionaries. Thank you.
Any quick questions? Okay.
Thank you.
I wish I had gone to a Montessori school. I'd be much more together. Cynthia Ripley Miller is our next presenter. Cynthia, welcome to IA Literati.
So, following Suzanne, I'm not only going to tell you that I'm a retired high school teacher and I taught English and history, but I write in ancient Rome, the Romans. So today I brought a little bit of a PowerPoint to show you. I've written 2 books. I'm a romantic historical writer. So I like romance, adventure, intrigue, mystery, kind of in the spirit of Sabatini and some of the other writers. I'm a first-generation Italian-American on my father's side, di cognome Nicoli, and second on my mother's side. One of the things I love about writing historical romance is that the research. I love to research things. So it's kind of fun for me to just go dig and, did they have this? Did they do that? How did they wear their clothes? What did they do? So today I'm going to show you, I write in the 5th century. This is a century people don't write about too much. It's at the end of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the medieval age. So what I'm going to show you is a little bit of a transition between what we know as the early imperial period, when you think of Julius Caesar, into the medieval time. So, let's see. So, I'm going to show my second book today, The Quest for the Crown of Thorns. A Roman senator's daughter and her warrior husband are confronted with a gruesome murder, and a dangerous mission that awaits them. They must carry a profound and sacred object to the safety of Constantinople, away from a corrupt emperor, a secret cult, and old enemies determined to steal it for their own gain. This is the cover of my book. It takes place, it starts in Rome and will go to Constantinople. So one of the first things I had to research was, because they were going to carry the relic of the crown of thorns to safety, was, did the crown of thorns exist? I didn't even really know. So when I did my research, it was kind of like Kismet or something, because it turned out that the crown of thorns went from Israel to Constantinople. And then later it was sold to a king in France. And that's where it resides now, at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. And you can see it once a month. So my heroes have to carry it from Rome to Constantinople, which is Istanbul, modern day Istanbul. The next thing I had to just figure out was, would they go by land or would they go by sea? And my research led me to understand that in those days there were no passenger ships. And people were very reluctant to travel by sea because of the weather and the conditions. So it made sense also for my drama and my mystery to bring them down the Appian Way. So I first learned that, you know, the Via Appia was built in 312, and then they built it over time, and it landed up in Brindisi. In my book, I use a lot of Latin, so it's Brundisium. In my book, I've put this map for the reader to see, so it helps track you through their journey. Then from Brindisi, you would cross over to Dyrrhachium, and it was called the Egnatian Way, and that would bring you up to Constantinople. Constantinople was built by Constantine. He went to Byzantium and he took it over in a sense, and he called it Nova Roma, or Eastern Rome, and then later was named Constantinopolis. And then this is, again, in my book, I put a picture for the reader to see that the Hagia Sophia was there, the Imperial Palace. The Messe was the main street marketplace area where there will be a lot of intrigue and stuff. So I thought, okay, what does the 5th century Roman Empire look like? So first of all, historians refer to it as late antiquity. It was Christianized by this time, and it even included a majority of pagan groups. However, in my story, the pagan group that my heroine is a Roman senator's daughter, and she has to, in book 1, she has to be a liaison for the empire to the assembly of warriors in Gaul to try to enlist their help to go against Attila the Hun. So all these groups were pretty much Christianized except for the Germanic Franks. And today I'm probably going to bring you a little bit and tell you a little bit about the Franks. I know they're not Italian, but you know, it's part of the story. So, the currency at the time was the silver denarius and the gold solitas. People used braziers to keep their rooms warm and